My father, Brian, demanded I pay double rent and give my entire $20,000 bonus to my brother. He needs it more than you, he shouted. I just nodded, already planning to move out and cut them off forever. But when my Aunt Clare stopped by and I told her why, the look on her face changed everything and revealed a secret trap I never saw coming. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The migraine had been a constant, throbbing companion for 3 days, a steel band tightening around my temples. I was sitting at my kitchen table, nursing a cup of lukewarm tea, when the front door of my duplex apartment slammed open. I didn't need to look up to know who it was. My father, Brian, never bothered with the courtesy of knocking. He owned the building, a fact he reminded me of at least weekly. "Nora," he boomed, his voice echoing off the hardwood floors. He stomped into the kitchen, his work boots still caked with mud from his construction site. I winced as a fresh clump of dirt fell onto the floor I had just mopped. "Hello, Dad," I murmured, pressing my fingertips into my forehead. The fluorescent kitchen light felt like a physical assault. "What's up?" "Don't what's up me," he snapped, ripping a chair out from the table and sitting down opposite me. He leaned forward, his face ruddy with an agitation that was all too familiar. "I just got off the phone with your brother." My stomach tightened. Of course. Darren, my 25-year-old golden child brother, the aspiring entrepreneur whose aspirations always seemed to involve my father's money, or, increasingly, mine. "Is he okay?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "He's fine, he's brilliant," Brian said, slamming a hand on the table. My teacup rattled and I flinched. "He's got a new venture, a big one this time, a high-end detailing service for luxury cars. It's a sure thing. All he needs is the startup capital." I closed my eyes, breathing in slowly. Dad, his last sure thing was that artisanal avocado toast food truck, and you're still paying off the loan for the truck he crashed. "That was a learning experience," Brian roared. You wouldn't know about that. You just sit in your fancy office, pushing numbers around. You don't know what it's like to build something." I bit back the retort that I was a senior financial analyst, that my pushing numbers around had just landed me a $20,000 performance bonus, and that my salary was the only reason I could afford the exorbitant rent he charged me for this supposedly family property. I had been so proud of that bonus. I'd planned to use it as a down payment on a condo, to finally have something that was truly mine. I hadn't told him about it yet, waiting for the right moment. Apparently, I'd waited too long. "I heard from Susan over at your firm," he said, his eyes narrowing. "Heard you got a nice little bonus." My blood ran cold. Susan was a low-level admin in HR, but she was also my cousin and a notorious gossip. "Dad." $20,000, Nora," he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing tone. "That's what she said." "It's my money, Dad. I worked for it." He laughed, a short, barking sound that held no humor. "Your money? You've had it too easy for too long, Nora. Living here in my building with your fancy job. Life has been soft for you." "Soft," I whispered, my voice trembling. I thought of the late nights, the weekends spent poring over market data, the stress-induced migraines. "Your brother, he's out there in the real world trying to make something. He's a man, he has needs. That money, it's going to him. He needs it more than you." I stared at him speechless. The audacity was suffocating. "You want me to just give Darren my bonus?" "And that's not all," he continued, a cruel smile touching his lips. He was enjoying this. "Your rent. It's double starting the 1st of next month, and don't think about arguing. This building is a drain, and it's time you paid your fair share." My fair share was already well above the market rate for a one-bedroom in this neighborhood. I knew this because, as a financial analyst, I track everything. He was bleeding me dry to fund Darren's fantasies. For a moment, the pain in my head was so blinding I thought I might pass out. I looked at the man who was supposed to protect me, the man who hadn't said a kind word to me since my mother passed away 10 years ago. All he saw when he looked at me was an ATM. A strange, cold calm settled over me. The throbbing in my head receded, replaced by a sharp, icy clarity. I knew exactly what I had to do. I looked up, meeting his bullish gaze. I relaxed my hands, which had clenched into white-knuckled fists. I smoothed my expression. And then I nodded, just a simple, slow nod. Brian's SM. Aisle widened. He thought I was beaten. He thought I was the same dutiful daughter who would do anything for his approval. Good, he said, standing up so abruptly his chair scraped backward. That's settled then. I'll tell Darren, he'll be so happy. And Nora, don't be late with that rent. He turned and stomped out, slamming the door behind him. I sat in the silence, the smell of his muddy boots and entitlement lingering in the air. He and Darren had made a critical error. They assumed I was weak. They assumed I was trapped. They were wrong. My plan was already forming. I would not be giving Darren my bonus. I would not be paying double rent. By Monday, I would have a new apartment. By the end of the week, I would be gone from this place and from their lives forever. I took a deep, shuddering breath. The betrayal was worse than the migraine. The hours after my father left were a blur of numb activity. The icy calm that had settled over me became a shield. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I simply acted. My migraine was still a dull ache, but the adrenaline of my new resolve pushed it to the background. I grabbed my laptop and opened the spreadsheets I already had prepared. I was a financial analyst, after all. Contingency plans were my specialty. I had a new life fund I'd been contributing to for years, separate from my condo down payment. It was my secret escape hatch, a safety net built from paranoia and premonition. I reviewed my budget, my credit score, and the pre-approval letter for a mortgage I'd secured last month. My original plan was to buy. My new, immediate plan was to rent, to get out. Fast. I spent the next 2 hours scrolling through rental listings, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I found 3 high-end apartments in a secure building across town, far from the duplex, far from the shadow of my father's control. I booked viewings for all 3 for the next morning. Finally, I allowed myself to feel. I leaned back in my chair, the silence of the apartment suddenly deafening. This place, this duplex, was the last tangible connection I had to my mother. She had loved this house. She had planted the stubborn rose bushes that still bloomed under the kitchen window. The thought of leaving them behind, of leaving her behind, sent a sharp pang through my chest. I picked up my phone and dialed the one person I could trust. "Nora, honey, is everything okay? You sound tired." My Aunt Claire's voice, warm and reasonable, instantly cracked my composure. I choked back a sob. "Hi, Aunt Claire, yeah, I'm tired, it's just a migraine." "Brian?" she asked, her voice instantly hardening. She knew. She was my mother's sister, and she knew her brother-in-law better than anyone. "He was here," I said, my voice small. He wants my bonus, my $20,000 bonus. He wants me to give it to Darren for some new-age car washing scheme." There was a heavy silence on the line. I could hear her breathing, a slow, controlled inhale and exhale. "And what did you say, Nora?" "I didn't say anything, I just nodded," I admitted. "He also told me he's doubling my rent." "He what?" The word was a shot. "It's okay, Aunt Claire. Really, it's the push I needed. I'm moving. I've already booked viewings for tomorrow. I'm calling to let you know. I'll be out by the end of the week." "Nora, wait, don't sign anything," she said, her voice sharp and urgent. "Don't do anything just yet." "I have to," I insisted, the frustration bubbling up. "I can't stay here. I won't let him take that money. I won't." "I know, honey, I'm not saying don't move. I need to see you. I have some things, your mother's things. I've been holding on to them. I think it's time you had them. Can I come by this weekend? Saturday." I was confused. My mother's things, what does that have to do with this? "Just trust me, Nora. Please, don't sign a new lease until I talk to you. Can you do that for me?" I guess, but Aunt Claire, I can't stay here. He's expecting that money." "Brian and Darren," she said, and her voice was so cold it sent a shiver down my spine. "They've always been greedy, but they're also incredibly stupid. They've forgotten one crucial thing." "What?" I asked, leaning forward. "What did they forget?" "They forgot who your mother was, Nora," she said darkly. "And they forgot who you are. I'll be there Saturday at 10, just sit tight and don't give him a dime." The line clicked. I sat there, staring at my phone. What did my mother have to do with this? She had been gone for a decade. She was a kind, gentle woman, a gardener and a baker, the complete opposite of my father's abrasive personality. "They've forgotten one crucial thing." The line repeated in my head. A new feeling, not fear or anger, but a strange, sharp curiosity, cut through the pain. My father always acted as if this building, his business, his whole life, was built by his own two hands. He painted my mother as a lovely, but ultimately simple woman who had been lucky to have him. For the first time, I wondered if that, too, was a lie. I shut my laptop. The apartment viewings could wait one more day. I had a sudden, powerful urge to look through my mother's old desk, the one my father had shoved into the back of my closet when I moved in. I had agreed to my father's demands, knowing I would defy them. But as I listened to Aunt Claire's warning, a new, unsettling thought emerged. I had been planning my escape. But what if, all this time, I had been holding the key to the prison? The next 2 days were a masterclass in strategic avoidance. I called in sick to work, a migraine being the perfect, plausible excuse. I needed the time to think, and more importantly, to avoid any further confrontation with my father or brother. My father, Brian, had never been a subtle man. He was a bulldozer in personality and profession. His construction business, Brian's Best Builds, was a name I'd always found ironic, as he was known for cutting corners and bullying subcontractors. He'd built his life on the idea that an iron fist and a loud voice were substitutes for competence. He had married my mother, a quiet librarian's daughter, and had, by all accounts, steamrolled her. After she died, his focus shifted. He had 2 children, the golden boy screw-up and the reliable girl ATM. And then there was Darren. My brother was a walking, talking monument to failed potential. At 25, he still lived at home, his office a corner of my father's dusty, failing workshop. He was tall, with the same fading good looks my father once had, but his eyes were weak and perpetually searching for the next easy mark. His ventures were the stuff of family legend. The line of distressed T-shirts, he just ripped holes in Hans' undershirts. The imported coffee beans, he'd bought in bulk from a discount grocery store and tried to resell at a 1,000% markup. And, of course, the ill-fated food truck. My father saw Darren as a reflection of his own squandered ambition. In pouring money into Darren's schemes, he was trying to buy his own legacy, to prove he'd spawned a disruptor and not just a dependent. My role in this dysfunctional play was clear. I was the audience and the financier. I was the responsible one, the boring one, the one who was good with numbers. My whole life, I'd been praised for being low maintenance. I now realized low maintenance was just code for willing to be ignored. My sacrifices were countless. I'd given up a scholarship to an out-of-state university to stay close to home, to help your father, as he'd put it, after my mom got sick. I'd used my first big bonus, not for a car or a vacation, but to pay off a surprise tax lien on Brian's business. Every holiday, every birthday, I was the one organizing, buying the gifts, cooking the meal, and then writing the check when Darren's card was inevitably declined. I had done all of this for a scrap of approval, a thank you, Nora, or even just a well done. It never came. Instead, my success was treated as an entitlement, a resource to be tapped. My $20,000 bonus wasn't a celebration of my hard work, it was an unexpected windfall for them. On Saturday morning, I was a wreck. I had spent the night in my mother's old desk, finding nothing but gardening journals and recipes. The anticipation of Aunt Claire's visit had my nerves screaming. At 9:59 a.m., there was a soft, firm knock on the door. Not the slam of my father, but the polite, assured tap of my aunt. I opened it, and the relief was so profound I nearly burst into tears. Aunt Clare was my mother's opposite in personality but her twin in appearance. Where my mother was soft, Clare was sharp. She was a retired legal secretary, and she carried herself with a no-nonsense posture that I had always admired. She stepped inside, holding a worn leather briefcase. "Nora," she said, giving me a firm hug. Then she looked around the apartment, her eyes lingering on the water stain on the ceiling and the chipped paint on the doorframe. "He's really let this place go," she murmured, her voice tight. "Aunt Clare," I started, "what is this? What's going on?" She walked to the kitchen table and set the briefcase down. Her face, usually so composed, was a mask of cold fury. This was the look I'd heard over the phone, and it was terrifying. "Nora," she said, "what I'm about to tell you is going to change things. Your mother, she was a smart woman. She was not the fragile flower your father painted her as. She saw him for exactly what he was." She clicked open the latches on the briefcase. "Your mother's parents, your grandparents, were very wealthy. They didn't trust Brian, not one bit. When they passed, they left your mother a significant inheritance with very specific stipulations." She pulled out a thick-bound document. "Your mother used that inheritance to buy this duplex, both units, outright, with SH. I stared at her. "What? No, Dad said he bought this place, that it was his first big investment." "He lied," Claire said flatly. "He's been lying for 20 years. She turned the document and slid it across the table. "This," she said, "is the trust. Your mother, knowing your father's appetites and his weakness for your brother, set this all up before you were even born. She created the Annabelle Mason Trust." Annabelle Mason, your mother. My hands were shaking as I touched the cover. "A trust? I don't understand." "Brian doesn't own this building, Nora. He never has. The trust owns it. Your father was named as the trustee, the manager. His only job was to maintain the property, collect reasonable rent to cover taxes and upkeep, and manage the asset." She paused, taking a deep breath. "And you, Nora, you are the sole beneficiary." I read the words on the page, but my brain refused to process them. Sole beneficiary. Annabelle Mason Trust. Nora Mason, beneficiary. I own this building," I whispered, my head spinning. "Not yet," Aunt Clare said, her voice sharp, pulling me back to reality. "But you're about to. Your mother was smart. The trust has 2 stipulations for the final transfer of assets." She pointed to a line of text. "Stipulation A, the beneficiary, that's you, gains full and indisputable ownership of all trust assets upon her 30th birthday." I was 28, 2 more years. So Dad's in charge for 2 more years. "Ah," Aunt Clare said, a grim smile touching her lips. "But then there is stipulation B, the one your father has apparently forgotten. Full ownership and control of the trust transfers immediately to the beneficiary if the trustee, that's Brian, is found to be in flagrant breach of his fiduciary duty." Breach of duty? I was a financial analyst. Those words had weight. "You mean, like mismanaging the funds?" "Exactly," Claire said, her eyes gleaming. "Like failing to perform upkeep. Like letting the property fall into disrepair. Or, for instance, like demanding rent from the sole beneficiary of the trust and then trying to extort a $20,000 bonus from her to give to someone outside the trust. He's not just in breach, Nora. He's taken a sledgehammer to the entire agreement." A slow, burning fire started in my stomach. All those years, all the rent checks I'd written. I wasn't paying rent to a landlord. I was paying my trustee, and he was supposed to be protecting the asset for me. Instead, he was letting it rot while charging me an inflated rate. "He's been stealing from me," I said, the words tasting like ash. "My whole adult life, he's been stealing from my mother's legacy." "Yes," Claire said simply, "and we're going to stop him." The switch from victim to strategist was instantaneous. The migraine was gone, replaced by a crystalline, cold focus. This was my world. Numbers, legal documents, consequences. Okay, I said, pulling my laptop onto the table. Here's what we need. You have the trust document. I have every rent check I've ever paid him, scanned and saved. I have photos of the water damage, the crack in the foundation he patched with caulk, the faulty wiring in the kitchen. I've been documenting it for years, just to get him to fix it. I knew you were your mother's daughter, Claire said, nodding. I've been keeping records, too. Every time he's pulled money from the property account to cover one of Darren's emergencies. I've been getting the bank statements. I was your mother's executor. She made me a co-signer on the account before she passed, just to keep an eye on things. Brian never thought to remove me. This was it. The clever trap my mother had laid from beyond the grave. She had known her husband. She had known her son. And she had put two brilliant, meticulous women in charge of protecting her daughter. He's not just in breach, I said, my fingers flying as I opened a new spreadsheet. He's committed fraud, trust fund mismanagement, possibly theft by conversion. He didn't just forget a crucial thing, Aunt Claire. He forgot everything. What's our first move? She asked. We don't move, we don't tip our hand, I said. He's expecting me to be scared. He's expecting me to either pay up or move out. We let him think that. I'm going to negotiate with him. I picked up my phone. We need a lawyer, not just any lawyer. We need the best trust and estate litigator in the city. I'll pay for it, with my bonus. I smiled, the first real smile in days. It's time to find out just how expensive my father's mistake really is. We spent the rest of the day in a flurry of activity. We found a lawyer, a shark named Ms. Alani, who, after a 20-minute video call where I screen-shared my evidence, agreed to see us first thing Monday morning. Do not engage with your father, Ms. Alani warned, her voice crisp. Be polite, be vague. Do not promise him any money, but do not refuse. Buy us time to file the emerge. NCY petition. That evening, my phone rang. The caller ID flashed Brian. I took a deep breath and answered, putting the phone on speaker. Aunt Claire sat opposite me, a pen and notepad ready. Nora, he barked. About time, so you got that money for me. Darren's found the perfect van, but the seller wants cash. Hi, Dad, I said, my voice smooth and calm. I've been thinking about what you said. It's a lot to consider. Consider? There's nothing to consider. It's my building, my rules. I know, Dad. I'm just looking at my finances. That bonus is in a high-yield account. It's a little complicated to move it all at once. I was lying, but it was the kind of lie he would understand. He grunted, fine, how long? And about the rent, doubling it is a big jump, Dad. I was hoping we could talk about it. Maybe I could. I don't know. Help you with the bookkeeping for the business? Find some savings? As a trade. I was dangling the bait, offering him exactly what he wanted, access to my skills for his failing business. There was a pause. I could hear him thinking. Bookkeeping, huh? Yeah, your brother makes a mess of it. Okay, we can talk. But I still need that bonus money, Nora. Don't you dare try to hide it from me. I wouldn't dream of it, Dad. I'll see you soon. I hung up. Aunt Claire looked at me, her eyebrows raised. That was masterful. He thinks he's luring me in, I said, closing my spreadsheet. He has no idea he's walking right into the trap. The investigation was launched. Ms. Alani filed an ex parte motion to freeze the trust accounts and demand an immediate, court-ordered audit. My father, the trustee, would be served on Monday, and he would have no idea what hit him. Monday morning arrived with a torrential downpour, as if the weather itself was bracing for impact. Aunt Claire and I were at Ms. Alani's office at 8:00 a.m. The office was a sterile, high-end landscape of glass and steel, a place where emotions were liabilities. The petition is filed, Ms. Alani said, not even looking up from her monitor. She was a woman who seemed to command the universe from her ergonomic chair. The audit is ordered. A process server is on his way to your father's workshop as we speak. He will be legally compelled to turn over all financial records related to the trust, effective immediately. What happens when he gets it? I asked, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. He will panic, Ms. Alani said. He will likely call you. He will threaten, he will beg, he will yell. You will not answer. You will let every call go to voicemail. You will not engage. Your Aunt Claire will be your only point of contact. Is that understood? I nodded, my throat dry. Good, now, let's go over the evidence of misappropriation we've already gathered. For the next 2 hours, we built the case. The property account statements Aunt Claire had saved were damning. There were thousands of dollars in transfers to Darren's Ventures, LLC. There were cash withdrawals from casino ATMs. There were payments to a failing truck lease that had nothing to do with the duplex. As I watched the numbers pile up, my anger was eclipsed by a profound, hollow sadness. My father hadn't just been a bad landlord, he had been actively, gleefully pillaging my mother's legacy. He had been stealing from me to fund my brother's whims. Right on schedule at 10:17 a.m., my phone, which I'd placed on the conference table, buzzed. Brian. I looked at Ms. Alani. She nodded. I silenced the call. It buzzed again, and again, and again. 10 missed calls in 15 minutes. Then came the texts. Nora, what is this? Some lawyer just dropped off a box of papers. Call me. This is a joke. You're behind this. Answer your phone. You're in big trouble, young lady. You're trying to steal my building. After all I've done for you. The final text made me laugh out loud, a sharp, bitter sound. You and your aunt are dead to me. He's panicking, I said, showing the phone to Ms. Alani. Good, she replied. Let him. But Brian wasn't the only one. A few minutes later, a new number called me. I didn't recognize it, so I let it go to voicemail. A message popped up. It was from Darren. I played it on speaker. Nora, hey Nora, pick up. Look, I don't know what's going on, but Dad is. He's going crazy. He's at the workshop just throwing things. He said you're trying to take the building. That's our building, Nora. That's our families. You can't do that. What about my startup? You promised. Dad said you promised. You're ruining everything. His voice was a high-pitched, desperate whine. He wasn't angry, he was terrified. His allowance was being threatened. He's not a monster, I whispered, the audio of my brother's pathetic plea hanging in the air. He's just a child. A child who has been enabling a thief, Aunt Claire said, her voice hard. Don't you dare feel sorry for him, Nora. He's 25. He's exactly what he's doing. She was right, I steeled myself. The first confrontation came sooner than we expected. We were leaving the lawyer's office when a familiar, beat-up construction truck swerved into the parking garage, blocking our exit. Brian leaped out, his face a mottled, furious red. He ran to my car and started banging on the driver's side window. Nora, get out of the car. Get out right now. What did you do? I flinched, but Aunt Claire put a hand on my arm. Don't roll down the window. Don't engage. You ungrateful, he sputtered, spit flying from his mouth. He was pointing a trembling finger at me. I gave you a home, I fed you, and this is how you repay me, by trying to steal my property. It's not your property, I suddenly screamed, my voice cracking. The pent-up rage of a lifetime erupted. I rolled down the window just an inch. It was never yours, it was hers, it was my mother's. The color drained from his face. He hadn't expected me to know. He was speechless. You've been lying to me, I shouted. You've been stealing from me. You demanded my bonus. You tried to double my rent. On a building I am the beneficiary of. You're in breach, Dad. You breached your duty. His expression shifted from sputtering rage to something else. A cold, hard cunning. The mask was off. So you found the trust, he sneered. Smart girl, your aunt put you up to this. She never liked me. It doesn't matter. It doesn't change anything, he lied, his voice regaining its bluster. I'm the trustee. What I say goes. I'm your father. You will show me respect. Respect? I asked. You want respect after you tried to steal $20,000 from me to give to him? After you've let this building fall apart while pocketing my rent? That money is for your brother? He roared. He needs it. He's my son. He's the one who will carry on the family name, not you. It was the most honest thing he'd ever said. I wasn't his heir. I was just the collateral. "This is a bad move, Nora," he threatened, his eyes narrowing. "You stop this. You call off your lawyer. You tell them it was a mistake. You do it, or I swear you will never see me or your brother again." He thought it was a threat. He thought, after all this, that I still wanted to see them. I just stared at him. Then, very slowly, I rolled the window all the way up. "Nora," he bellowed, banging on the glass again. "Nora." I put the car in reverse, backed up, and drove around his truck. I didn't look back, but in the rearview mirror, I saw him standing alone in the rain, a pathetic, furious man who had just lost everything and was only beginning to realize it. The week that followed was a descent into legal warfare. Brian, true to Ms. Alani's prediction, did not go quietly. He hired a cheap lawyer who immediately filed a countersuit, claiming I was an estranged and unstable daughter, and that I was colluding with a vindictive aunt to steal a hardworking man's life's work. It was a pathetic, transparent flurry of lies. Brian's desperation was palpable. He tried to regain control by locking me out of my own apartment. I came home from a long day at work. I had, of course, returned, needing the semblance of normalcy, to find a heavy-duty padlock on my door and an eviction notice taped to the wood. It was signed, Brian Mason, landlord. I just laughed. I called Ms. Alani. Within an hour, a sheriff's deputy was on site, bolt cutters in hand, to let me back into my home. The deputy served my father with a restraining order, compelling him to stay 500 feet away from the property. His attempt to look strong had only resulted in him being legally barred from his own home, which, of course, wasn't his home. Meanwhile, the court-ordered audit was a goldmine. The auditor, a severe-looking man who clearly despised financial irresponsibility, unearthed the full, shocking extent of Brian's deception. It was so much worse than we thought. It wasn't just the casino withdrawals and the truck payments. Brian had been using the duplex as collateral for his failing business for years. He had taken out a second, and then a third, mortgage on the property, mortgages that were fraudulent, as he wasn't the owner, only the trustee. He had forged my mother's signature on documents years after her death. He had defaulted on property taxes, letting the building get perilously close to a tax sale multiple times, only for me to unknowingly bail him out with my rent checks. He had systematically drained the trust of nearly $250,000. He had taken my inheritance, my mother's gift, and set it on fire to warm his own ego. "This is no longer a civil matter, Nora," Ms. Alani said during an emergency meeting. Her face was grim. "This is criminal. Forgery, bank fraud, aggravated theft. He's not just going to lose the building. He's facing prison time." The news hit me like a physical blow. Prison. Despite everything, this was still my father. My brother, Darren, was still struggling. His loyalty, which I now understood was based entirely on financial dependency, was being tested. He had been calling Aunt Clare, trying to get to me. "She has to stop this," he'd pleaded, his voice cracking over the speakerphone. Dad's not sleeping. He's saying he's going to lose the business. He says it's all Nora's fault. Can't she just, share? The building is big enough for everyone. Why does she have to be so greedy?" "Greedy?" Aunt Clare had spat. "Your father has stolen over $200,000 from her, Darren. He's a criminal, and you've been his accomplice." "I didn't know," he cried. I needed capital, I had ideas. It's not my fault they didn't work out." The pure, unadulterated childishness of it all snapped my last thread of sympathy. We needed one final piece of evidence to break the spell completely. We needed to show Darren and the court that this wasn't just incompetence. It was malice. The auditor found it. A new bank account, opened just last month in Darren's name. The opening deposit, a $5,000 transfer from the trust, labeled property roof repair. It was the final nail. Ms. Alani scheduled a final settlement conference. It wasn't really a settlement, it was an execution. Brian and Darren arrived at the lawyer's office, looking haggard. Brian had lost weight, and his usual bluster was gone, replaced by a sullen, simmering resentment. Darren just looked terrified. "All right," Brian said, sitting down. "Let's get this over with. What do you want, Nora? A few thousand? The apartment rent-free? Fine, but you stop this nonsense. Now." Ms. Alani smiled, a thin, terrifying expression. "Mr. Mason, your position here is confused. You are not in a place to bargain." She placed a single file on the table. "This is the auditor's report." She slid a second file. "This is the evidence of bank fraud related to the forged signatures." A third, "This is the paperwork for the fraudulent mortgages." And a fourth, "And this is the bank statement for your son's new account, showing the $5,000 transfer for a roof repair that never happened." Darren, who had been staring at his shoes, looked up. His face went white. "Dad, you said that was from the business." "Shut up, Darren," Brian hissed. "Ms. Alani," I said, my voice clear and strong, "please also present the bank's offer." Brian looked at me. "Bank's offer?" "Yes," Ms. Alani said, "the bank whose mortgages you fraudulently obtained. They are displeased. They have offered a full waiver of criminal prosecution. If you sign over the trusteeship to Ms. Mason immediately, forfeit any and all claims, and sign this full confession. It's a very generous offer, considering the alternative is a wire fraud investigation." This was it, the irrefutable proof, the final, powerful confrontation. Brian stared at the confession. He looked at me, then at Darren, then back at the paper. He saw the bars. Darren finally broke. You lied to me," he shrieked at Brian. "You used me. You were going to let me take the fall for that money." "It was for you, you idiot," Brian roared back. "Everything I did, it was for you." "You didn't do it for me," Darren cried, tears streaming down his face. "You did it for you. Nora's right, you're a thief, and you're a liar." The spell was broken. The golden child had finally seen the rot in his own reflection. Brian looked at his sobbing son, he looked at the confession, and he looked at me, his eyes dead. He picked up the pen. The signing of the confession felt like a funeral. Brian's hand shook as he scribbled his name, a final, defiant act of surrender. The air in the conference room was thick with the smell of his defeat. When it was done, he didn't look at me. He just stood up, shoved his hands in his pockets, and walked out. Darren, however, stayed. He was sitting in his chair, his head in his hands, making these small, wounded sounds. After a moment, he looked up at me, his eyes red and puffy. "Nora," he whispered, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I knew, but I didn't know." "You knew he was giving you my money, Darren," I said, my voice flat. I was too tired for anger. I know, and I'm sorry. Is he really? Is he going to?" "He's not going to prison if that's what you mean," I said. "The bank has its confession. They'll just go after his business, what's left of it, for the money." "Oh," he said, a small, pathetic puff of relief. He stood up, wiping his nose on his sleeve. "So, what happens now to me?" I looked at this man, my brother, who had been a willing parasite for a decade. "What happens to you, Darren, is that for the first time in your life, you're on your own. You're 25. It's time to get a job." He stared at me, waiting for the punchline. When he saw there wasn't one, his face crumpled again. He turned and shuffled out of the room, a grown man with the posture of a scolded child. "Well," Aunt Clare said, sipping the water Ms. Alani had provided, "that was that." "It's not over," I said. "I own a building that is falling apart and is weighed down by fraudulent liens." "Yes," Ms. Alani said, stacking the files. "Now the real work begins, but you have one thing on your side, your bonus." My bonus, the $20,000 that had started this all, it was still sitting in my account. The climax wasn't the shouting match. It wasn't the dramatic reveal. It was the quiet, systematic, and utterly ruthless efficiency of the days that followed. I, Nora Mason, a 28-year-old financial analyst, was now the sole owner and manager of the Annabelle Mason Trust. My father was legally barred from the property. My brother was, I heard, sleeping on a friend's couch. The public showdown came a week later. It wasn't a party or a family dinner. It was a meeting with the bank, the same bank my father had defrauded. I walked in, not with a lawyer, but with my aunt and a briefcase. I sat down across from two vice presidents who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. "Ms. Mason," the senior VP said, "we have your father's confession. We understand this is a difficult family matter. The bank is prepared to restructure the fraudulent loans, transferring them into your name." "No," I said. He blinked. "I'm sorry." "You're not restructuring anything," I said, opening my briefcase. "You're forgiving them." He laughed, a short, nervous cough. "Ms. Mason, that's not how this works. We were the victims of fraud." "Were you?" I asked. I pulled out my first file. "Here is the timeline of the loan applications. And here," I pulled out a second file, "is the credit history of Brian's best builds at the time you approved them. He had already defaulted twice. Your loan officer approved a $100,000 mortgage to a man with a 520 credit score, using a property he didn't own. A property whose ownership and trust status is a matter of public record." A 5-minute search would have shown that. Their faces hardened. "You weren't victims," I said, my voice as cold and sharp as steel. "You were negligent. Your bank failed in its due diligence, and you are complicit in the fraud. Your officer either didn't check, or he did check and approved it anyway." I leaned forward. "So here is what is going to happen. You are going to remove these fraudulent liens from my property. You are going to file a report with the state, citing your own internal negligence. And you are going to do it in exchange for me not filing a lawsuit against this bank for predatory lending, negligence, and complicity in fraud against a trust." I slid a third document across the table. It was a settlement agreement drawn up by Ms. Alani. "Furthermore," I said, my voice never rising, "my mother's original trust account was held at this bank. Your bank. You allowed the trustee, Brian Mason, to violate the trust's charter for a decade. You allowed him to commingle funds and make withdrawals for non-trust-related activities. You are also on the hook for that." The two VPs looked at each other. They were no longer dealing with a grieving daughter. They were dealing with a financial analyst who had all the receipts. The senior VP read the settlement. He read it twice. He looked at me, his eyes full of a new, grudging respect. "This is aggressive, Ms. Mason." "It's business," I replied, using their own language against them. "My father was a bad businessman. I am not." He picked up a pen, a heavy, expensive one. He signed the agreement. "The liens will be cleared by the end of the day." I stood up, and so did Aunt Clare. I closed my briefcase. "Oh, and one more thing," I said, pausing at the door. "My $20,000 bonus, I'm moving it to another bank, effective immediately." I walked out of that bank not as a victim, but as an owner. The air was cold, but for the first time in my life, I felt truly, completely warm. I had done it. I had saved my mother's legacy. I had saved myself. The downfall of Brian's best builds was swift and unsung. With the bank calling in its legitimate loans, the ones he'd taken out for his business, and no more trust fund to plunder, his house of cards collapsed in on itself. He filed for bankruptcy within 3 months. The trucks, the tools, the workshop, all of it was seized and auctioned off for pennies on the dollar. He lost everything. I heard from a cousin that he was living in a rented room in a town 2 hours away, doing odd jobs for cash. He never tried to contact me again. The confession I'd forced him to sign, coupled with the restraining order, had been a final, unbridgeable gulf. Darren's fate was less dramatic, but in its own way just as final. After a few weeks of couchsurfing, he'd been forced to get a job. Not as an entrepreneur, but as a package handler at a shipping warehouse, working the night shift. He sent me one long, rambling email, full of excuses and tentative questions about whether the other apartment in the duplex was available. I replied with a single sentence, "I wish you the best in your new career." I blocked his email address. My focus was on the building, my building. It was a wreck, but it was my wreck. I used my $20,000 bonus, not as a down payment on some stranger's condo, but as the first investment in my own property. I hired a contractor, a legitimate one, recommended by Ms. Alani, and we started the long process of repairing a decade of neglect. Aunt Clare was my partner in crime. She had a surprising passion for picking out tile and light fixtures. We tore out the stained carpets, revealing the beautiful hardwood floors my mother had chosen. We replanted the rose bushes, which had been choked by weeds. We fixed the roof, the real roof, and the water stain on my ceiling finally disappeared. I renovated the other unit, the one my father had kept empty, and rented it out to a lovely young couple, a teacher and a nurse. Their rent check, a fair, market-rate rent, covered the new, legitimate property taxes and the insurance, with enough left over to start rebuilding the trust's capital. 6 months after that day in the lawyer's office, I was sitting on my newly repaired front porch, watching the sunset. The duplex was painted a bright, clean white with a dark blue door, just as I'd always imagined. Aunt Clare came out, handing me a glass of iced tea. "It's beautiful, Nora," she said, sitting in the chair beside me. "Your mother, she would be so proud." "I think she would be, too," I said, a genuine smile on my face. The migraines were gone. The steel band of tension that had lived in my skull for years had simply dissolved. "You know," Aunt Clare said, "I found this when I was cleaning out the last of your mom's boxes." She handed me a small, faded photograph. It was my mother, looking no older than I was now. She was standing in front of this very duplex, holding a set of keys. She wasn't the fragile, gentle woman of my memory. She was smiling, her eyes bright and defiant, full of strength and secrets. She looked like an owner. She looked like me. I tucked the photo into the frame of the front door. My father and brother had seen me as a resource. They thought I was a line item in their budget, but my mother had known the truth. She had known my strength before I did. She hadn't just left me a building, she had left me a fortress, a test, and the tools to win the battle. And I had.